this training module program would have helped me tremendously, because like I said, I didn't even know, number one, even what WSSB was. I didn't know what that stood for. I didn't know it was a state-funded grant. And so just being able to look at these modules would have been a tremendous help to me. You're going to get all that information. You're going to be able to watch that first module. It says, this is what WSSB is. This is why this funding is here. This is how it got to be here. This is happening a lot, unfortunately, I think, where new directors are coming in without anybody there to train them. You know, the other person is already gone. So what we're doing is we're building a training program, a set of videos, modules, that is hopefully going to help new directors as they come on, and give them some modules that they can look at to help them understand what these grants are for, where they came from, why we have them, how they can use them. And the nice thing about it is that it will be in modules, and so they can piecemeal it if they want to. They don't have to sit down and watch whatever it ends up being, 3 hours or at a time. If they just have a question on how to write their grant, they can go to the grant writing module. Or if they have a question on their monthly reporting, they can go to the module that deals with monthly reporting.
My role here, unfortunately, is having to have dealt with several different embezzlement cases in our community. We're here to help your organization try to implement better controls and procedures to help prevent this in the future.
One of the reasons that I present these with Mark is I have to review our policies and procedures, internal controls, financial statements, and make sure that we don't have any holes in the way that we do things, make sure that we can prevent embezzlement and fraud here at Commerce County Bank. Today we're making this presentation to help protect you guys from fraud and embezzlement in your day-to-day operations. For a little bit of background, every year about 2/3 of small businesses and nonprofits fall victim to some level of fraud. That could be a few $100s, few $1,000s to several $100,000 and even millions of dollars. In the past 4 or 5 years, just in our community with nonprofits, we've ourselves found out about 4 or 5 embezzlement/fraud instances. And as we'll talk about later, those are just the ones that we've found out about. Most of these go unreported, and even more of those undetected for several years. Typical nonprofit loses between 5% and 7% of revenues annually as a result of fraud. That's not every nonprofit every year, but across the nation, fraud accounts for losing 5 to 7% of revenues annually. The types of fraud that can be perpetrated can either be internally or externally. Today, we're focused more on fraud and embezzlement that occurs internally, but it's also important to be aware of fraud that can happen externally. And that's generally from a third-party provider, some sort of relationship that you have with a third party. The vast majority of internal fraud, which is what we're focused on today, is committed by longtime trusted employees. I would say 95 to 100% of the time that we get involved, the first thing that we hear is, never would have expected it. The guy or girl has worked for us for a long time, 15, 20 years. They've always done a good job. They've always been honest. Never would have suspected it. And that makes sense. If it was someone that was new, someone that you didn't trust, you'd probably be paying more attention. When you get comfortable with someone, begin to trust them, then you don't pay as much attention, and that's when things can fall through the cracks. Just like the prior bullet, most internal fraud is a result of lax internal controls, a lack of segregation of duties, and I would say most of the time, neither of those. There's big holes in internal controls, and there's not a segregation of duties. You're having one employee perform multiple duties, so there's not the checks and balances that are necessary to detect and prevent fraud and in embezzlement.
Okay, so one of the first things we're going to talk about, as Mike mentioned, is the internal fraud. Most common internal fraud that we see is going to be embezzlement. The interesting thing that most people don't realize, when they think of embezzlement, they think of someone taking money from an organization or a business. Embezzlement can be as simple as someone, stealing cleaning supplies, or someone taking the company credit card to buy their own personal groceries when they go to get some stuff for the business or organization. So what embezzlement is it's the theft by employees or other trusted partners of the business. Most embezzlement involves theft or diversion of company funds to the employees. Embezzlement can happen in any department of the organization. Like I said, it could be as simple as cleaning supplies. It could be, someone taking toilet paper. It's, this time in our lives, toilet paper is very valuable. So, that's one of those things that, people tend to take. Typically it happens where either cash is handled, the books are handled, or supplies are handled.
One of the primary focuses we're going to talk about today is spotting employee fraud and embezzlement. Most employees or trusted partners who commit fraud or embezzlement, they exhibit telltale signs. And that's something that's important to pay attention to. In a large percentage of these situations that we find out about, you'll see the employee committing the fraud living beyond their means. A lot of times they're struggling with financial difficulties. They may have an unusually close relationship with vendors, or they have, they exhibit excessive control issues. They might not want anyone else to do their job duties. They might not never take a vacation, because if they do, they're afraid if someone else does their job for a week or two, they'll find out that something doesn't look right.
Revisions happen because sometimes you get the budget all worked out and at the beginning of the year, but who knows what's going to happen in the coming year. A good example of that is with COVID, and that really disrupted a lot of budgets when there weren't in center participants. If people couldn't come to the centers, so that disrupted a lot of the budget that was originally scheduled. So there's always a chance for revisions. And so this is all covered. If you want the policy on this, just go to the Wyoming Health website. It's www.health.wyo.gov. And on that website, you'll find under the Aging Division, you'll find the WSSB board. And under that, you'll find the policies that cover the different situations like this, like revisions. So revisions, there's two types of revisions. One revision is a revision that's more than 25% of the category. Now there's some question on this, is if that was more than 25% of the category or more than 25% of the total budget. And under the Wyoming rules and regulations, we determined it's more than 25% of that category. So of course the categories would be on your budget, it'd be the different areas like personnel, travel, equipment, consumables, supplies, and other. So if there's a change, if your revision is going to be a change of more than 25% of that category, then a revision needs to be submitted to the board for approval. And then even within that category, the category, like for example, under other, might include several things like insurance, audit, or dues, fees, and so forth. If one of those lines changes, if you move that around even within the budget, and that's a change of more than 25% of that total category budget, then a revision needs to be sent in. So that's the time it needs board approval, and of course these things don't always happen overnight. They won't be considered till the next board meeting. The next board meeting could be in a couple weeks, could be in a month or two. So the revision won't be considered until that board meeting. And then with that revision, there's some forms that need to be sent in, and that need to be included with that revision. And first of all, there's you need to send in the original budget page, and then you need to send a copy of the revised budget page. So at the top of the original page, put original, write original, so we know which is which. And on the revised page where you have the revision, show the revision, then include show what the revision is. And of course, in the letter requesting a revision, it'll explain what the revision is also. And so another thing that's important is, so of course, that'll be sent to the Wyoming Senior Services Board Chairman, a copy of that revision request to the board chairman, as well as your center representative on the board. And so one thing that's important to remember is if that revision is accepted, if it's approved at the board meeting, then you go ahead and put that in place. But the following quarter, make sure that that revised budget is put down on your quarterly report under the budget category. Otherwise, if you put the original budget there, and I've had a couple centers do that, they forgot to put in their revised budget, and so it looked like there's more money there than they thought there was. So make sure if you do a revision the following quarter, put down what that revision is in that budget column on the quarterly report. And it's also good to keep that line of communication between the bookkeeper and the director. I had one center that did a revision, and then the bookkeeper left, and so the director wasn't aware. Actually, the bookkeeper left and the director left, and they had a new director, and the director wasn't aware of that revision. So they went ahead and put the original budget down for the column in the quarterly report, and thought they had more money than they actually did, and so they overspent that category. So make sure if you have a revision to put that revised amount in the budget category, budget line column in the quarterly report. So that's if the revision is over 25%. If it's less than 25%, then it does not need board approval, but it still needs to be sent in to the board. The same thing, send in a request letter telling us what you want to revise, and then also include a copy of the original budget or the revised budget from a previous quarter, and then send in a copy of the revision, the current revision that you're doing. Again, put the original at the top, write original at the top, and revised at the top of the revision budget. And that needs to come to the board too. It does not need board approval, but we still need copies to know that this revision was being made. And again, so the board, especially the board representative, is aware that there's a change in that category. And so we can make sure that you aren't overspent when you do your quarterly report. And one thing I didn't cover in the original revision request is if you change a line item or add a new line item, then a revision is needed. So if you wanted to add on maybe a nutritionist that you didn't have in the original budget, that also needs to be sent in as a revision. So if you're revising something that's already there, or if you're adding a new line item in your budget, and then that needs to be sent in for approval. And again, approval if it's more than 25% change in the category, and no approval needed if it's less than 25%. But we still need copies of all the paperwork. And so I think that pretty much covers all of what it takes to do the revisions. And again, you can find all this information on the WSSB website. If you go to health.wyl.gov, you'll find under Aging Division, you'll find the WSSB policies. But you're always welcome to contact your board representative or board chairman if you have questions on how these revisions are done. So I want to stress the importance of communication between everybody involved with the budget, with Wyoming Senior Services Board. Keep that line of communication open. that if there's a change made, a revision made, everybody needs to know about it that's concerned with the budget, with the finances in the office. So it's really important everybody is on board with what's going on. If there's a lack of communication, then something like a revision may not be known to somebody else that needs to know. The board or the director of the center may not know that there is a revision, or the bookkeeper may not know there is a revision. So it's so important to have everybody communicating with each other through this whole process, and with the process of working with the WSSB board and with the financials and with the budget. And then another important thing to remember is I talked about doing the different types of revisions. If the revision's over 25%, then a request needs to be submitted for approval to the Wyoming Senior Services Board. And if the request is under 25%, wouldn't really be a request, but it just would be a notification that that is being done. It still needs to come to the board for their attention, but it's not really a request. It's just a notification that you're going to move some money around, and then that would help keep us informed when we go over your next quarterly report that that there has been a change made, and so we know that that there's sufficient money in the category if there was a change made. And that would prevent overspending. If a change is made and we weren't aware of it, and we thought you had plenty of money in the budget, and it turned out there wasn't, if it wasn't recorded or if it wasn't entered in that quarter report, then we wouldn't be aware of the change, and there may be an overspending that happens because the correct amount wasn't entered in that column. So when a revision request is submitted to the board and the board approves it, I'll back up a little bit. At the board meeting where the request is considered, it's always nice to have a representative of the center on hand too, the director or some representative that can address that revision. If there are questions from the board, then there will be someone on hand to address those questions from the center. And so if the request is approved, then the paperwork will be sent to the state. There's no forms that need to be signed or anything like that. But the approved request, revision request, will be sent to the state, and then that'll be entered into their records that that revision was submitted and approved. And then again, when it's under 25%, of course, it's not a request; it's just a notification. But the reason we need the paperwork is so, again, the state's aware of that change, and they can enter that information wherever they need to enter that information. So there's a process through all this, and all of it, if the steps are followed, then that expedites getting the revision in and approved and to the state, and then that expedites allowing you to move the money around sooner. The sooner all the steps are completed, the sooner you'll be able to move the money around to where you need it. Another area I want to address is I talk about paperwork, getting paperwork sent in to the board, and so we can send it to the state, is the timeliness of that paperwork. When you do quarterly reports at the end of the quarter, then the following month, we need that report in by the 15th of the following month, and we always schedule the board meeting about a week after that, the 15th. And so it's important to get those reports in by the 15th of the month following the end of the quarter, because not only helps us get our paperwork completed. If we don't get the paperwork in, then it makes it hard for the board to give approval. We have to maybe give a tentative approval and hope the paperwork's going to be right, but it flows a whole lot easier if we get that paperwork in prior to the 15th of the month. And one other thing that gets slowed down is for the centers to get reimbursed on their invoices. If you don't get the reports into us by the 15th, so we can consider that at the board meeting, then that's going to take longer for that paperwork to get to the state. So then they can send you reimbursement for your expenses according to your invoices. So times, dates are very important. The quarterly reports need to come in to us by the 15th of the month following the end of the quarter, and then the end of the year report that also needs to come in to us by the month following the end of the year, end of the fourth quarter. So dates are really, really important. And again, we don't want to be strict, just waving the rules over you. We're trying to do it for your sake because we want you to get your money, get your reimbursement as soon as possible after the end of the quarters. And one other part of getting the reports in on time is just to take into consideration that each of the board members has around five to six centers that they are responsible for. And so part of our responsibility is to go through those reports and just as much as possible make sure that everything's correct before we submit it to the board for approval. And if we're not getting those reports in by the 15th of the month, then that makes it more work for us, that we need to go back to the center and check and see if they're going to get the reports in. We want to, not to say that we're overworked or anything, but then we just want to, it works a whole lot easier if we get our reports in when they are supposed to come in. And when we get 5 or 6 reports in, if they're all in by the 15th, then that gives us ample time to be able to go over them and submit for approval. So just take into consideration that, again, there's a process, and if any part of it gets slowed down, then it just slows down the whole process.